Hello and welcome to Beyond the Lens. I'm JD. Thanks for tuning in. Today, I've got a special guest with me. I've got Phil PK Screams. He is also a concert photographer. So today we're going to talk all things concert photography. If this is something that's interested you, a lot of people I know ask me about getting into the business. We're going to talk pretty candidly, I think, about all sort of things. We've both been doing it for a long, long time. I think I met Phil probably about 4 or 5 years ago.
At least 5, yeah.
In the pits, and I think, you'd been doing it for a bit, but that was the first time that I had run into you, was at a August Burns Red concert.
Was it August Burns Red?
I believe it was August Burns Red about 5 years ago.
Cool.
Yeah, so I cover a wide spectrum. You're a little more niche, and you do some different stuff as well. Mm-hmm. So I guess my first question is, why concert photography? How'd you end up getting involved? And, we'll take it from there.
That's a fair question. I guess, I don't know. I went to school first for a year of open studies, and I was originally supposed to be going into broadcasting. But I guess in my entire life, music has always been something that has been like in my blood. So I decided to leave university and pursue music on my own terms, and I decided to go with everything I could, whether it's doing photography, whether it's playing in my own band, whether it's promoting shows, whether it's setting up stages, doing all that stuff. So I guess I found the photography and I just hopped into it. I already had my small network of people that kind of helped me out, helped me set up, made those extra connections, and just went from there.
Yeah. Because you've worked on things like street teams, for example, sort of old school street teams where you go and you do postering and you do all the event stuff prior to, and, sort of build up the hype going around
the show. Exactly.
The show, and I know you've done a lot of video interview stuff in the past. You were doing video interview stuff as well. Yeah.
That's kind of, I don't know. For me, I guess video interviews is still a kind of go-to, but it's now coming down to scheduling with the bands as well, because that's a little bit more difficult with touring and whatnot. But video interviewing is still definitely a kind of a passion of mine. It's harder. I used to do a lot of stuff with local bands, but with the local scene kind of being on a back burner for a lot of bands in the scene, I decided to start focusing more on the bigger ones, whether it's doing interviews as a written up one for Canadian Beats.
Right.
Or doing video interviews with touring bands and all that stuff.
Right. So keeping yourself busy, basically.
Yeah, nonstop.
Yeah. And a lot of your stuff, I mean, I guess, a lot of people, what they ask me is sort of, how do you get to the point where you're getting sort of media credentials, where you're getting involved, and how do you start working with bands? Mm-hmm. I mean, I know how, things sort of play for me, but how did that work for you? How did that all sort of come to be?
Well, definitely, like you said, we met 5 years ago, and back then it was a lot different. It was a lot easier to be like, hey, this is what I'm doing. I'm building this portfolio. This is what I'm submitting for. I'm giving them all my past write-ups that I've done, not everything, but just kind of some of the links. And then I'm like, this is what I'm submitting it for. Yes, I'm independent. I'm not submitting for anything large. And most of the time, bands are willing to give other artists a chance. So definitely with the touring bands, that's kind of what I'm doing. As I mentioned, I do write for Canadian Beats.
Yep.
So Canadian Beats is kind of the website that covers me for Canadian acts and festivals. I just submitted my media credentials for Sled Island and for the Calgary Stampede.
Right.
So because it's a Canadian festival and they have Canadian artists, that's a lot easier to get covered because we're submitting to a larger website with more views and all that stuff.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, it's, there's lots of ways to sort of get that access. What I find personally is, before I actually met you, there was kind of this huge void when I was taking photographs of people that would be there. Typically, it was myself. the Calgary Sun and the Calgary Herald. That's all I would kind of see. Mid-tier shows, especially when we started getting to like Mac Hall to kind of
Mac Ballroom,
marquee level kind of things. Occasionally I would see guys like from the Reflector, which would be the university paper, which makes sense because at the time
university venue.
Mac Hall was a university venue. You know, Union Events was owned by the university. So I mean, obviously they're giving, you know, people some opportunities that are working in things, you know, like media and journalism to get sort of opportunities and get their feet wet, right? So I mean, that all makes perfect sense. You know, so a lot of people were getting that through schooling. They would have that access through schooling. But in a lot of cases, like I would go to the Saddle Dome and that would be it. Yeah. I would say things have changed a lot over probably the last 10 plus years that, you know, that how people are getting in is a lot different. What people are looking at to get from photographers. I mean, a lot of times before it was simply, they knew that you had an outlet, you were throwing it on the wire, you had people that wanted to buy the photos, you knew the people that wanted to, you know, basically get coverage, and you were in. Nowadays, it's not that simple anymore because number one, magazines, you know, that we all used to sort of read, you know, even iconic magazines like the Rolling Stones, you know, the Rolling Stone is just not as big as it used to be. I mean, obviously they still exist, they still do things, but you know, it's changed a lot. And then I sort of started seeing people like yourself move in, people like Joshua Platt, you know, young people starting out, which was super awesome because it gives me, you know me, I talk to everybody.
Exactly.
It's kind of a weird. If you've ever seen a show or you ever watch photographers and stuff like that, there are people like me that are very outgoing and talking and love to talk about photography and what you do, because to me, you're all my peers. You all do the same thing.
And you can always learn something new from someone else.
What I find sometimes now too is that, you know, there are so many people coming in from such a wide variety of things that a lot of times I don't know if it's intimidation to talk to somebody or if it is nervousness that they don't feel, you know,
like they belong completely, like in that, you know, section,
you know, or you know what it is, or in a lot of cases, what I found is that they don't necessarily have a game plan. They've just kind of shown up. And I don't know if they've got a plan, like a business plan, or how they're going to evolve as a photographer, or how they're even going to work in the industry. And you know, that's interesting to me because I had a situation where basically I lost. I used to work for Corbis.
Yeah.
I got cut out because they got bought by Getty Images, so I lost sort of where I was getting my revenue from all this stuff from. And I started asking people in the pit, like, who you working for? How's the pay? You know, where all this kind of stuff. And I was surprised at how many people, you know, were saying, well, I just, you know, I kind of don't really get any pay or anything like that. So it was kind of a very, very interesting, you know, experience for me because I was kind of like, wow, you know, it's great. I mean, there's definitely a time to do stuff for free in concerts and get your foot in the door. But if you don't have a long-term plan, I mean, the reality is, how long can you sustain yourself?
Exactly.
You know.
No, it was a good. You touched on the magazines, which is like a really interesting subject. Like Alternative Press and Rock Sound, two big magazines in the music scene on that like alternative side. They've all basically discontinued their physical print. They all going towards like downloads and like having subscriptions on your phone and all that stuff, which is, again, the day and age media moving towards digital stuff. Not saying that all photographers are doing this, even myself, like I still love doing photography, but that now goes into the subject of what I'm going to do next.
Right.
Like you mentioned, interviews. I find that doing the interviews, whether it's just a quick podcast kind of style or whether it's like a video interview, it's going to be easier for me in the long run to maybe move forward.
Yeah.
Because everyone's on their phone. You can open up YouTube, you can see the interview, and then you're done.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, there's definitely that aspect to it. I mean, this day and age, media is changing by all means. Like print, you know, I'll say it. I've said it before. I mean, it's dead. Print is dead. Print magazines are dead. You can maybe get them at the airport. You see a small selection at the grocery store. I mean, the places that used to get them all the time, things like 7-Elevens, corner stores, have such little selection. You've got, Chapters or Indigo, these big bookstores that still carry magazines, but even them, they're limited, and those places are closing down as well.
Yeah.
I mean, so, the day and age of buying sort of a monthly magazine or getting a monthly subscription is long gone. And a lot of people are getting their stuff from the internet. And I mean, I guess kind of the interesting part is that I've done the print aspect and I've sort of evolved as, it went from film to digital photography. And I think, kind of the turbulence that we see now is a lot related to that because, even, things like the Calgary Herald, Calgary Sun, which are major news publications, Post Media are having difficult times sustaining sort of their print, and they're having a hard time charging for that information otherwise.
Yeah.
It's kind of a weird kind of time. We've seen some stuff locally, things like the Sprawl and the YYC Scene, which is specifically for music and arts and culture, that are doing crowdfunding to support that. They've had, I would say, what I would call some limited success, but again, interesting. And then the hard part is that they know, I mean, even in the scenes when they were talking about doing their fundraising, it's like, we've got people that do work. We kind of need to pay them, they can't just, rely on people to do it for free, right? So, I mean, it's kind of an interesting, shift in sort of how all this stuff goes about, So.
No, definitely, yeah. And I don't know about you, but like you mentioned, like the magazines are gone because like back in the day, even like 5 years ago, you can walk to the corner, you'd see the Calgary Sun, you'd see the Calgary Herald, like news boxes. You would walk down the street, 75% of the houses have like the delivery service right to their door. You see the newspapers laying on the doorstep. Now you walk down the street, there's like maybe 1-2 houses on the street that have it.
Yeah. If that. I mean, to be honest, I have not read a newspaper in probably, I would say, at least 5 years at all.
I didn't do it.
So, yeah, probably, I have not seen that kind of, happen in a long, long time. So, I mean, even myself, and I used to read it sort of every day. So it's interesting.
It is, yeah. Same thing. Like I used to, read the newspaper, read like those alternative press and like rock sound magazines, and even just like look at the photos that were included as posters or whatever. But now, like, I can scroll my Facebook feed, my Twitter feed, whatever else, and all the information that I need is there.
Yeah.
I used to read those rock sounds, and I used to have the subscription to Rock Sound Alternative Press because I used to love getting those posters, seeing like the photographers like view and how they took the photo of whatever show, festival in England, and enjoyed reading the articles. But now, like I mentioned, I can scroll my Facebook for 5 minutes, and I would get all the information I need for whatever show's coming up, whatever band's touring next. And same thing like with Instagram, because that's super quick. Like I'm on transit, I scroll, boom, oh, there's on tour. I take a note, I go home, I look up the tour dates. If I can shoot, I shoot. If not, I'll just go to the show. Yeah.
The interesting part with that is that, I mean, there is a certain amount of sustainability that bands have to put in. So, I mean, bands will have their own publicity stuff. They'll do their own video stuff, their Instagram stuff, their Twitter stuff. A lot of times they have photographers for that. But as far as general news coverage, and kind of the crazy thing is, even with Facebook and,
Twitter,
Instagram and Twitter, there's kind of that gap because there's no source. I mean, you can go to the venues, but if, somebody goes to a different venue or they use a different promoter, it's not centralized, you miss it. And I mean, even with magazine coverage, I mean, it's not 100% kind of, coverage in those regards. So it's really interesting, how, like I said, it's evolved into what it is. I don't think it's become effective. I mean, we had things like, Fast Forward, which was a mainstay in Calgary publications, it just shut down. Yeah. It's these things almost need supported. And I mean, who supports that? Whether it's the venues, the artists, the fans, all that kind of stuff. I mean, that remains, to be seen. But I mean, there's kind of this almost black hole that's being created in a lot of ways where, it's everybody's sort of getting sucked in. I honestly believe at this juncture, and I get asked this too, it's is concert photography a sustainable way to make a living? And I would say at this juncture, the answer is no. No. If you are starting out now, you're probably going to have to figure some stuff out.
Yeah.
And you're going to have to build yourself sort of different. I mean, again, it's not as simple as going to get and setting up with a magazine and getting paid. And it's like, I'll go to the show, I'll get paid, a few $100, or I'll get these shots and it'll, it'll take off. I mean, that does happen to a degree with social media to a point. Like, a lot of bands will pick up your stuff afterwards, but in a lot of times too, I mean, they also know who they've approved, and they're sort of targeting that. So I mean, it's kind of a quality quantity trade-off that you see. I mean, you and I both shot the Stampede, for example. I would say Stampede is one of those places where there is a lot of people where it's their first time in the photo pit and all that kind of stuff. And I mean, it's good. You've got to start somewhere. And I'm not taking a bite out of anybody that's doing that. But I mean, you definitely see it there, right?
You do. I think that, like you said, Stampede, it's a great place to start because, like, you're shooting the daylight, so you're not worrying about, like, the lights in the venues. You're not worrying about all that stuff. I think my counter argument, my recommendation, I would say, is if you want to get into concert photography, if you have friends in bands, talk to those local bands. Be like, hey.
That was always my starting point. Yeah. In reality is that if you want to start in concert photography, my advice is this. Take your camera, which is probably not the best camera in the world. No. You probably don't have the best lenses in the world. And you are going to go, and your best place where you're going to get the most bang and traffic for your photographs, honest to God, you could shoot the biggest act tomorrow. You're going to get more mileage out of local.
Yeah,
you're going to get more mileage out of local bands. They're more likely to share it. Musicians are generally poor at that level, so at best you might get a few drinks, but you're going to make some good associations. Like that, and I mean, I work with some great local bands as well. We've done some great video stuff. In the next
Path Less Travel,
Path Less Travel, Sevens Wild, Fold, all these guys. I've done video work with, I've done photo work with, Open Air. I've done their promo stuff. But at the end of the day, like, I mean, there are tons of other bands that are just starting out, and sometimes it's establishing that relationship. I always talk about social media work and relationships. It's having those relationships and being able to say, hey, let's do this together. Like, a good example is this podcast in itself. I mean, initially I said to you, hey, if you want to sit down and you want to talk about photography stuff at any time, just let me know, right? And it's an open invitation. And, it's funny because people, I think, sometimes think people throw things out and they don't really mean it. But I mean it, and it just sits there. And you messaged me back like a week ago, and you just said, hey, I'm looking to do that now. Is that still on? I'm like, yeah. And here we sit, right? I mean, it's those relationships that get things done and help you grow and expand. Same thing with music. If you start with a band that has 0 followers, and you help them with their Facebook and their socials and all that kind of stuff, and you establish this relationship, right? I mean, you might not even be the best photographer in the world. They might not even be the best band in the world. Or they could be the best band in the world, and you could be kind of the worst photographer at that point. If you have that relationship and they start hitting bigger venues, or they start making it big, or you have local examples like, somebody like the Static Shift who gets launched to a national sort of level. If you have that relationship with those guys, chances are they're going to pick you.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, that's the same thing. Like, you have to put that work in as well. Like, you make an agreement saying like, hey, I'll shoot this local show you're playing this night. You throw me $20, you throw me a couple drinks. Cool. But then after that, you have to actually put those photos out there, throw them on Instagram, tag the band, hashtag things that are actually relatable to that band. So music, concert photography, all that. People actually go through those hashtags.
Oh, absolutely.
And they'll be like, oh, this photographer's playing Calgary. We're playing Calgary. Let's shoot these guys a message. Maybe it'll be interesting to shoot a bigger bands down the road.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's exactly it. Right? It's like I said,
work.
It's all about relationship. It is work. You've got to put in the work. I talk about, we've talked about Gary Vaynerchuk on this thing, and he talks about jab, 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 right hook. It's giving, and then, at some point somebody's going to give you something in return. I mean, obviously you can't sustain an entire business on just, charity work and all
No.
that kind of stuff. There has to be, a balance. Everybody kind of has to eat, but the band's included, but as well. And, I always tell people, like, people ask me, what do I charge? I mean, I do have a rate, but a lot of times it's a sliding scale. It's like,
Same with me.
a lot of times on the local level, things will be reduced. I'm not going to, necessarily do it for free. Because I can't afford to do that.
No.
But, we'll work something out, because I know that you don't have the budget that a larger band does.
Yeah.
And you're not going to, pay for me to tour around with you and all that kind of stuff, which happens as well. And I mean, those are kind of the opportunities that people are looking for, but that is all established through relationships. And, it's kind of the best way to go about things. I mean, you can definitely, like I said, you can hammer out, doing stuff for The Wire, getting stuff for media magazines. But again, like I said, that's something that's falling back. It's not as prevalent as it used to be. So, I mean, you've got to make your own thing. And like you said, YouTube is a perfect example. I know it's not photography and stuff like that, but a lot of guys that do photos also do film. There's a lot of cross-pollination these days. And I think, you can't just be specifically one anymore, that you have to have, sort of a diverse background in media and be able to create what people want. But I mean, the fact that Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and all these bands have this stuff as well, I mean, there's an opportunity there to create things and, sort of move forward in those regards. And as well as, being a photographer, I mean, you go by PK Screams, that's your brand.
PK
That's
photography,
yeah.
PK Screams modeling, interviews, whatever it is I'm doing. Yeah, just throw like the last little bit on, but it's PK Screams.
Yeah. And it's a great lesson for anybody who's watching or listening on iTunes for self-branding. It's making yourself a brand, right?
Yeah.
People know what to expect from you, all that kind of stuff. They know that, that you do the YouTube stuff. They know that you do the photography stuff. And it's essentially building a brand. And if they like that brand, it's,
something they'll work with. Yeah. But the same thing, like you mentioned back, like first timers, if you're in the pit, to talk to your fellow photographers, like none of us bite.
Yeah.
Unless you ask. But then after that, like the other day, I don't say I was self-defeated. I knew I could do better with the photos, but I just couldn't critique myself. So I messaged you like, hey, these are the photos I shot. I know I can do better. I know the venue sucks for lights because, like you mentioned, it's just a hard venue to shoot at. But like you gave me critique, and now like I look at those photos differently, and I know where I went wrong.
Yeah. And the thing is, and I mean, I was probably, because I know you, I was, there was no fluff to that.
No.
It was kind of like, this is what you need to do. But I know what you're doing. And that's the perfect thing as well. Like, I mean, to me, to be honest, I mean, it's all about growing. I go every show I watch. I take note of who's in the pit. If I don't know you, I'm probably no word of a lie. I'm gonna seek you out.
Yeah.
I'm like a private eye in those regards. I want to see what you shot at that show. And, it's, this is going to sound super competitive, but it is because it is a competitive industry. I'm not going to sit there and fist fight with you in the pit. I'm going to be friendly with you and all that kind of stuff. I want you to do well as well.
Yeah.
But I have to be honest with myself. Am I producing
the best
stuff that I can do? How am I faring with everybody else? Because, if 5 people are shooting the same thing and you're all freelance, I mean, it's
hard,
the best shots that are going to get picked. And I mean, that's the reality of the situation.
Yeah.
I mean, there are no, sort of participation ribbons in business.
But I think at the same time, I guess like the three of us, so you, me, and Josh are kind of lucky because like Josh shoots for his own kind of magazine.
Yeah.
I shoot for my own magazine / Canadian Beats. Yeah. And then you shoot for your own or for like the bands themselves. So though there is that competition, it's also in the sense of we're competing against ourselves because like I want to do better for myself. You want to do better for yourself. But like I'm not submitting for Josh's magazine. And you're not submitting for Josh's magazine in this case, for example.
Yeah. My point being is that there's always room to grow. So I will always take a look, right? And I'll say, I want, and this is just me and my personality, and this is, how I run businesses. Like, I want the best shot. That's hands down.
Same,
I want to look at it. I want to say, I got the best shot. Mm-hmm. That doesn't always happen.
No.
I'll be the first to admit that. But when I go look at it, I'll take a look and I'll say, okay, what did they do different? Mm-hmm. What could have I adjusted?
Exactly.
I may not have still taken the same shot, but what would I have done otherwise? And it's learning. And you know, it's all about, you know, if you want to talk about concert photography as a business and a profession, you know, it's knowing what you're doing as well too. I mean, it's, you know, a good example is Rise Against. You know, I know that, you know, Tim is going to jump at some point, so I know I need to be in the right spot for that, right? And that's what you wait for. The rest of it can kind of wait, but there's that iconic moment there where he jumps.
Like the one you grabbed of me crowd surfing with Tim up there.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's all that is, I mean, it's not planned because I don't go and we say, okay, at this time you're exactly going to do this. But I know
it's going to happen.
It's going to happen. And I know his tendencies. I know where he holds his microphone. I know which hand he uses. I know where he has a tendency to go. I know where the location is. I know where the tape markers are. And if you don't know what tape markers are, you haven't shot enough.
No.
So, and I mean, these are all things in one. And again, that's a good reason to have conversations in the pit, because it's like, you know, I'll explain it to you. There's no secret, you know.
Exactly. Like I've shot August Burns Red like 3 or 4 times, but if it's your first time shooting August Burns Red, come up, ask us. Like, I'll be like, okay, this is what I've experienced. This is what I know, but it could be a different venue, it could be a different night. It could change completely 100%. But with that information, at least you'll be aware and you'll be able to see, like, okay, I see this happening. It's probably going to happen. So
and that's exactly it. I mean, a good example of that was Tool. Myself, Josh, the Calgary Herald was there, and then one other photographer, and it's interesting because it was Crack Max that was photographing it, and I didn't know who it was, and he kind of kept to himself, but I figured, like I said, I'm going to take a look and I'm going to figure it out afterwards, and it was fairly easy to figure out fairly quick. But the interesting thing was the Herald guy, the Herald and Sun photographers are not always dedicated to things like music. They will shoot sports, they'll shoot, you know, City Hall, all that kind of stuff. They're you know, journeyman photographers that will shoot everything and anything, right? So they don't necessarily know the nuances of what goes on in the concert. And Tool, of course, you know, he's like, well, what do I expect? I said, well, you know, it's weird that we're here, for one, because, you know, Maynard rarely like approves anybody to do anything. And then it's, you know, his shows, typically he stands at the back in like black clothing in pitch black. And it's kind of like, that's what to expect. And it was interesting too, because, you know, I'm like, maybe it will be different this time. I don't know, but I'm kind of expecting that. And sure enough, that was what happened, you know, the standard Tool thing. You know, I know that Josh struggled, that I struggled. I'm sure the Herald guy did. And I know that Crack Max most definitely did, because, you know, of the equipment that he had and, you know, just sort of, you know, the nature of how the lighting was in that show. But, you know, it was funny at the end, you know, like I was saying to Josh, I'm like, really, at the end of the day, as long as your stuff is as good as everybody, as long as it's not like totally terrible, you know, we all know, like, nobody's going to get better shots. Like, nobody's going to have this crisp, clean shot of Maynard in the back, you know, without noise, because it's impossible. You know, unless, you know, there's some sort of arrangement between him and the photographer to get some, you know, flash at a certain point where, you know, nobody else is there, then that's a different case. But, you know, you're going to line up, so it comes down to composition and all that kind of stuff. So I mean, it's always interesting, it's always a challenge, and it's always, you know, good to, like I said, to talk with each other, and, you know, and have people sort of drive you to get better shots. Because I mean, to be honest, you know, for a long time when I didn't see you guys there for years, you know, it's like, you know,
where did you go?
The Herald and the Sun, like, I mean, they don't really care sometimes, and I mean, not all of them. Some of them do, some of them don't. But, you know, it wasn't like it was anything groundbreaking. You know, so when there's other people that are strictly music shooters, I mean, that's
much more interesting in a sense. And not only that, like, take the opportunities. Like, most of the time, the rules are very basic. It's 3 songs, no flash, kind of thing. But then there was also shows like In This Moment, where In This Moment was like, okay, you know what? If you want to shoot the whole show, shoot the whole show. Because bands like that are going to be much more artistic with their shows, much all that. So if you have that opportunity, take it. Like, you'll...
absolutely.
And take your time. Like, even though you have 3 songs, take your time with your equipment. Like, focus that shot, take the shot, take 2 or 3 if you're doing like rapid shots, like I do sometimes with like more action sequences, like fancy flag, all that, especially if they're jumping around. But yeah, the big thing is take your time. Like,
so I think we're pretty close to the end here. I think what we'll do is I'll just give you let's throw out there. If you're new to concert photography in the pit, what are some things that you would like to see a new concert photographer do?
Talk to your fellow photographers.
Okay.
Take your time. And like have fun with it.
Yeah.
Like though it is work, have fun. Like if you're not having fun, you're not going to produce your best quality of work.
Yeah. Mine will be don't hog space. So get in a spot, take your shots, move. You don't want 1,000 of the same shots anyways. And I mean, to be honest, you've got to get those kind of things. I mean, get there for the shots that you need. Like I said, I mean, in Rise Against, I was hogging my little bit of space until I got that thing, and then I was completely out of there. And it's like everybody else, you can all get there. But know that, but don't hunker down for 3 songs in one spot, especially if you're bigger and move around. And the other thing is, don't step in front of your fellow photographers. Just touch them in the back and walk behind if you can. Sometimes it's really, really tight and it gets kind of weird, but you'll see it, kind of make eye contact, make a switch. Everybody's there to work, and we don't want to get in each other's way. And sometimes, it's a bit, bit of a crazy place, but, we all work together. We will all get through it great, and we'll all get what we need in the end.
Yeah.
So just want to say thanks to Phil for dropping in and talking with us. This is Beyond the Lens. You can find Phil at
PK Screams on all social medias.
Perfect. So there you go. Check out PK Screams. And until next time, see ya.